Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Comic Book Chronicles. I am your host, Rydercat, and you can find me at Rydercat on Twitter, and you can find me at News Nerds Need on Twitter, and you can find me at CBCaps on Instagram.
Columbia down the way.
And that sound effect you hear comes from none other than our man in Brooklyn, one agent underscore 70 on Twitter and Instagram.
What's up, everybody?
And you can find this here program on the Coastal of the Podcast Network, that's cspn.us.
Do it today.
You can also find us on your podcast virtual place of choice, whether it be Google Play, Apple iTunes, aka Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the Coastal of the Podcast Network's SoundCloud page. And folks, if the name was not indicative of anything, we are here to talk comic books. Surprise, surprise. We might talk a few other things, but sometimes it's mainly comic books. And we're going to start off with, oh shoot, I know something. Heroes Reborn, number 5.
Wow, we are actually up to number 5. That's amazing to me.
I know, right?
They're coming out on a weekly basis, so that they're keeping a pretty tight publishing schedule on this. So they're moving this along.
Thank goodness.
As we've mentioned over the last several weeks, Heroes Reborn is taking the place of the Avengers book, as well as the place of several of the core Avengers titles, core Avengers solo titles, that is, Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man. Although I think they mainly paused in May, because I think there's some more coming out in June now.
So wait, is there still some left for Cap? I thought Cap. Well, no, that's right, because he started. Yeah, that's right. Cap still got a couple of issues to go before it ends, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think I don't think they're holding off so much on Cap, but I think they might have held it off a month,
right?
Because they definitely held off on Iron Man, because I know Iron Man is coming out next week, so right. they probably held off mostly in May. But anyway, getting to the creative team on this book, it's written by Jason Aaron with art by R.M. Guerra, colors by Giulia Brusco, and we have a second story with pencils by Ed McGuinness, with inks by Mark Morales, and colors by Matthew Wilson. Both stories are lettered by VC's Corey Pettit. So, again, if you've been keeping up with these Heroes Reborn main miniseries issues, they have focused upon members of the Squadron Supreme of America, individual members by issue. So this issue is the focus of this issue is Nighthawk, the erstwhile Batman of the Marvel Universe. Although in this issue, as Roddy Cat and I were mentioning just prior to the show, not only is the origin of this version of Nighthawk taken from or adapted from that of one Caped Crusader over at the Distinguished Competition, but also is adapted heavily from the origin of one Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Man. And there are subtle and not so subtle nods throughout this entire first story that show you how they have taken these two characters, these two flagship characters of two gigantic comic book companies, and melded them into what this Nighthawk character is. I thought it was pretty interesting that how they decided to pick and choose where they wanted to take things from.
Right, and one part which we will talk about with one of the tie-in issues, which gets brought up in this issue, is definitely lifted heavily. It's amazing. So here's the thing: one, you can call this Heroes Retold.
that's definitely so. I was about to say, I think we found our title for the show.
Exactly. Because the way they have the interwoven is sort of said, two the two, I don't want to say obvious parallels. Definitely the one kind of obvious parallel to DC, but definitely kind of lifted a popular Marvel comic character for some stuff. I gotta admit, you can kind of groan at it, but it's actually almost impressive.
Right.
I dare say, because it's like, okay, yeah, so you already got the premise of this one that's kind of this character, but then you can, it's like, well, yeah, there's also this other character who you know well, has some stuff that's kind of similar to that, but also like, yeah, here's a story beat, storyline that you can kind of just like, stitch in, to make things even more obvious and spicy. So yeah, and nothing says that more than one, this, and two, like the tie-in, but actually both of the tie-in issues, honestly, in slightly respects, because you get a little bit more, which we'll talk about in a second, briefly, or not in a second, but in a minute or two, briefly, because you can kind of see where that comes into play. Um, but you can definitely see that Jason Aaron seemed to have a lot of fun kind of putting these together. Like the one thing I was going to say, the or last thing I was going to say was like, yeah, it's kind of amazing. Like you can write it off as it being lazy, because as much comic book history as there is, you can pretty much take, well, here's here's a parallel to this, here's a parallel to that, and here's some story beats that, yeah, that can definitely be lifted, and probably has in other ways in other books, that can be mined, let's say, for material. In this case, because of the catalyst of this whole universe, or because of this Heroes Reborn event and the universe that it's setting itself in, you can kind of play with that a little more directly, um so that it is actually not as lazy as you would think it'd be. It'd be like, well, I mean, it is in a sense, but in a way it is not, because if you think about like I said, the premise of this thing, in that there's no Avengers and Spider-Man and everybody else is not even there anymore. Like, okay, so you can take some of that stuff and be like, so here's what happens if it happens in this situation, which kind of lends it to being a little bit fun, even if it is still a little, could be considered a little lazy, but it's still pretty fun. I have to admit that. So
I've enjoyed this so far, just to see. I guess because I was never all that familiar with the Squadron Supreme from their initial appearances in Avengers and the Squadron Sinister. I admit to not having read the Mark Grunwald miniseries, where I think a lot of those characters get fleshed out.
But that's the beautiful thing about this. Is like, okay, here's parallels to, like, yeah, you might not have, but here's some parallels that kind of can get you there, even if you're not familiar with the stuff. Like, yeah, it's not a 1-to-1, and yeah, this is a kind of a separate thing, a retelling in a different light, but you can still get there with Heroes Reborn with these characters, because of the what the similar stuff that they use. Um, I think this one is definitely the least, let's say, American centric, because as we saw in Hyperion and Blur, it's like there's a lot of, oh yeah, I stand for truth, justice, and America, the good old American way, and all that kind of stuff. But there's less of that in this, even though Nighthawk is not the captain of industry that he was, in his original origin, but
Right.
the he does have a higher position, in this light, that's, I guess, could be kind of similar, in a way. Like he's basically he is a congressman, and he is even outside of this, like in the regular Avengers book, when everything gets back together, that's kind of what he's hiding out as.
Exactly.
So there's like they're kind of using a lot of that, and which means that they're setting this in DC. This and the design issues this week are set in DC, and you get some familiar beats of other stories and other characters, but now set in DC.
Right. Although I did laugh when R.M. Guerra's art for the demise of the Falcon doesn't translate. I did flip through,
Yeah.
and I know Roddycat's going to talk about these books, but R.M. Guerra still draws the bridge as the Brooklyn Bridge when it's supposed to be the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and I
Right.
laughed. I was like, "Oh wait, this isn't right."
Right. It was like, you know what? That's it doesn't matter for that. You know what this is.
It's a bridge. You know what the
Exactly.
parallel you're supposed to draw is.
Exactly. So I
Yeah.
don't know
So
if there was anything more on Heroes Reborn #5 you got to say.
no, just that the backup story
All
is
right.
Black Panther centric. It's just a quickie, how it's a quickie look into how Captain America and Blade are slowly but surely gathering the actual Avengers in this reality.
Right. So do we call him Black Ronin? Blade Blade Panther, not Blade Panther,
He's just
Ronin
Ronin.
Panther.
Anybody can take up the Ronin,
Yeah.
you know.
But he does still morph back into his Black Panther costume, which is like, because at first I was like, oh wait, so why is Blade using the Ronin get up again? And then it's time to find out, oh right, this is the thing they've been doing this whole time. Um, in
Like
fact, wait,
anybody who's looking to go undercover takes up the Ronin mantle, right?
pretty much. And speaking of, if I'm not mistaken, um, I think it gets also get touched on in the main. Yeah, it does get touched on in the main stuff because doesn't he kind of um catches wind of what Blade and Steve are doing with Echo, like they broke her out. I think that happens in this issue at the end of this. You don't
I
remember?
want to say that happened earlier because this issue is all about just a brief dust up with Nighthawk.
Right.
It happens before this, I think, where Nighthawk and Black Panther run into each other. I
No, no,
think
no, no,
in
no. I mean, where Nighthawk is pretty much at his night cave, and or maybe that's something. Maybe that's one of the other ones.
yeah, that
Um,
might be in one of the tie-ins. I'm not sure. I know what you're talking about. I remember seeing it.
yeah. So because this all kind of blurring together. Cause like I said, I read them all back to back, and it was like, yeah, this is
Right, right. Yeah. So I was about to say, look who's binging now. So
well, and to be fair though, because these are like, the same thing with the Hyperion one. There was like the tie-ins were at the very least, so some stuff in the main book kind of tied into the tie-in books.
right.
And this one is no exception, but kind of more so because, like I said, there's a thing that comes up in Heroes Reborn 5 that gets alluded to that we've seen, that we've got news on that happens in one of the other ones, which I guess we can kind of go ahead and get into real quick. Because there's really not much to say about it, but to say about these other tie-in books is just so. And like I was telling HF70 prior to the show, it's like, yeah, if you've read Heroes Reborn 5, you kind of get the and you see what is being alluded to for in the tie-ins. Then you don't. You can read them for a little bit extra context, but you pretty much know what you're getting into with those tie-ins. Um, and one of them we already had news about, so it's like we did not know that was coming. That being said, though, I actually kind of want to see if Heroes Reborn is what I'm thinking about in Heroes Reborn happens in that, and that's or not the other ones, but we need to actually move on.
Let's cover the creative teams on those books.
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say I didn't read them.
Oh, yeah,
Skimmed
yeah,
them.
yeah.
You
You're
got
right. You're right. I get it. Hold on,
it.
give me a second because I gotta close. Why is this thing not want to
I
close
was going to
yet?
say I'll read them off your notes.
No, no, no. I got it. 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 So I'm just kind of
Live podcasting, folks. Live broadcasting on YouTube.
yeah, indeed. Okay, yeah. So
And,
that was in Heroes and Reborn. That was definitely the whole breakout thing with Steve and Blade, and yeah, he did kind of catch wind of it in the main story. So
Mhm.
I guess we'll first go to sure, why not? Heroes Reborn Marvel Double Action #1, which is written by Tim Seeley, pencils by Dan Jurgens, Um, inks by Scott Hanna. Uh, colors by Chris Sotomayor. Letters by VC's Corey Pettit. I think you should. Well, if you haven't skimmed it, you kind of should, because you can. The one thing I can safely say I enjoyed about this one was the old school feel of it. Like they totally took a classic spin of it, including down to the footnotes down at the bottom of the pages.
Yes, I
uh,
did see that. This is the one that deals with what happens to the Falcon, right?
That's correct.
Yeah,
So
I did skim this one, so I definitely recognize, especially those notes at the bottom of the pages.
So if you're of a certain search of vintage and remember a certain Spider-Man storyline having to do with a particular person's fate, you will very much understand what goes on in this book. Not even belabor it. It is totally that, but there with a couple of with a couple of updates, twists. Obviously it's Nighthawk instead of Spidey. It's Falcon instead of this person. Excuse me, Falcon instead of this person. Uh, you know, the Goblin is still there. It's Norman Osborn. So most of the beats of this one particular storyline is totally there. And like I said, I kind of groaned at it, but at the same time, I kind of chuckled at it. It was like they really just did this whole thing, and that's what made it all amusing, because it was like, okay, yeah. So basically, and this has been in the news, so kind of spoiler alert, but this is and it was alluded to in Heroes Reborn #5. So this is the story of how Nighthawk lost his former partner, or Batman lost a Robin. It is almost literal.
Right. Exactly. But it's adapted. It's adapted into the story of Peter Parker losing somebody.
Exactly. And
And
even if you're watching the video, you can see the cover, so you can definitely see. And if you know anything about that storyline, you can definitely see it.
exactly. I mean, it's hard for us to spoil a storyline that old,
Right.
but we're kind of dancing around it so that you don't, get completely spoiled on everything. I wanted to mention that Dan Jurgens definitely adapts his style to mimic, or at least resemble, some of the, John Romita Jr. style art.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a couple of shots in here of Gwen, mild spoiler alert, um, uh, of this version of Gwen Stacy. I'm just like, oh man, they really went, hard into the old style. And then there's a depiction of Greer Grant. I'm like, va 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 voom, Greer Grant.
Right.
Holy
I was like,
cow!
yeah, I was like, wait, what's Tiger doing here?
It's like, damn, Greer Grant. You know, I was just kind of like, oh goodness, what the heck is, what is Dan Jurgens drawing here? So,
Right. Yeah, lest we
but
forget, Greg Grant was, I believe she was a model or something at that time. But I was like, I don't remember having anything to do with that. But it was there was a reason why she got put in here, and there's a reason why they're drawing from, and have Gwen in here, because I think there's because I know they alluded to it also in the main book, that of another tie-in that's going to happen. Well, I think that's next week, is what you said earlier.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
So that's the other reason, and I have a strange feeling that's probably going to tie into the events of this book, because
More than
even in this book, there's some allusion to it, because even before what happens to Falcon, he kind of mentions, it's like, oh yeah, we need to bring some more people into the fold. Maybe this person, nah, maybe that person, maybe Gwen. Nah, she's
right,
too young. So
right. I think that particular adaptation is going to be more Batman centric.
yes, totally.
So, all right. And what's the other one?
And the other one is Heroes Born American Knights, which is a play on Marvel Knights, obviously. And the creative team is. Let me go ahead and get the books up. Let me say they cover it real quick.
I was going to say this one. I barely skimmed.